It was the kind of silence that only follows a storm, a silence that feels thick, heavy, and unnatural, like the world itself is holding its breath. Inside the marble halls of Buckingham Palace, whispers rippled through corridors like cracks spreading through glass. The news hadn't yet gone public, but the staff already knew. Something irreversible had been signed. A royal decree unlike any seen in modern history. And at its center, one woman, Meghan Markle. The same Meghan who once stood at the top of the palace steps, smiling beneath the soft London rain, waving to crowds who cheered her as a symbol of modern royalty. The same woman who once promised to bring a new energy to the monarchy. Now, her name was being erased from official documents. Her royal titles, revoked. Her connection to the crown, cut clean. The paper that ended it all bore a chilling line. By order of His Majesty the King, supported by Her Royal Highness, the Princess Royal, all privileges are hereby revoked. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. That was it. A single sentence that severed years of history, controversy, and illusion. But how did we get here? What pushed King Charles and Princess and to finally say, enough? What made the monarchy, an institution built on discretion, take such a public, punishing stand? And why now? Was this justice? Or revenge? That's what this story is about. The moment the royal family finally broke the unspoken truce with Meghan Markle, and the woman who helped make it happen, Princess Anne, the one they call the steel spine of the monarchy, the one who never flinched, never complained, and never forgot her duty. She's not the kind of royal who smiles for the cameras or leaks to the tabloids. No, and is the one who stays silent until it matters. And when she speaks, her words can move mountains. Or, in this case, dethrone a duchess. Let's rewind. In the weeks leading up to the announcement, strange things began to happen behind palace doors. The king's schedule grew more private. Certain senior courtiers were called into closed-door meetings. No aides, no secretaries, no notes. Even seasoned royal staffers described the mood as uneasy. One long-serving attendant reportedly said, "It felt like we were preparing for something big, something final." And they were right. At Balmoral Castle, the same place where Queen Elizabeth spent her final days, a private meeting was held. It was there, in a room lined with family portraits and a silent ticking clock, that the future of Meghan Markle's royal existence was decided. But before we go there, let's pause for a moment and look at why this matters. Why the decision to strip Meghan's titles isn't just a royal drama. It's a constitutional earthquake. For centuries, royal titles have been the most guarded currency of the crown. They're more than just fancy names. They're symbols of power, legitimacy, and belonging. To lose one isn't merely a formality. It's an erasure from history. Once that ink dries, you're no longer royal. You're ordinary again. Now imagine that happening to the most globally famous woman in modern royal history. The Duchess of Sussex, gone by decree. Some might say it was inevitable. Others believe it was a betrayal. But the truth? It's complicated, and it runs far deeper than a single scandal. Because this wasn't just about Meghan's behavior. It was about control. Legacy, image, the one thing the monarchy values above all else, survival. And for King Charles and Princess Anne, Meghan had become a risk the institution could no longer afford. You see, from the very beginning, Meghan wasn't just another royal bride. She was a disruptor, a force of modernity that the monarchy didn't quite know how to contain. Her interviews, her public statements, her Hollywood connections, they all chipped away at the tight, silent image the firm had spent decades maintaining. Every time she spoke, headlines flared. Every appearance came with controversy. And when the Netflix series dropped, oh, that was the breaking point. The series painted a picture of royal cruelty, emotional neglect, and institutional coldness. Meghan played the wounded survivor. Harry played the loyal husband caught between love and duty. The palace? Painted as villains in their own story. But what the world didn't see was the internal fallout. Inside Buckingham, anger simmered. Princess Anne, who rarely voices emotion, was reportedly livid. She saw the series not as a personal attack, but as a betrayal of the monarchy's code of silence. To Anne, it wasn't about gossip, it was about loyalty. You don't turn your back on the crown and still expect to wear it, she reportedly told a close aide. Her words struck a chord with Charles. You have to understand, Charles isn't impulsive. He's cautious, deliberate. He's lived his whole life waiting for this role, walking a tightrope between personal pain and public image. He wanted to be a modern king, a peacemaker. But with Meghan and Harry, peace never came. Every attempt at reconciliation leaked. Every silence was twisted into scandal. Every olive branch became another headline. Eventually, even a patient king runs out of patience. So when Anne came forward, direct, unwavering, and armed with decades of royal loyalty, Charles listened. She didn't shout. She didn't demand. She simply told him the truth he'd been avoiding. You can't save someone who doesn't want to be part of the family. And that's when the wheels began turning. Behind the scenes, palace lawyers began reviewing old charters, searching for legal precedent. Could a duchess truly be stripped of her title? What were the constitutional implications? It turns out, it could be done. The king has sovereign authority to revoke peerages granted under his reign, particularly if the individual is no longer performing royal duties or is acting in ways that compromise the integrity of the crown. Those words, compromise the integrity, became the basis for the entire decree. But the emotional side of this decision was far heavier. Because, make no mistake, Charles didn't just sign a document. He signed away his son's link to the family. Because to strip Meghan's title was, symbolically, to draw a line through Harry's too. That's the contradiction at the heart of it all. Duty versus love. Tradition versus compassion. Father versus monarch. And in that tension, something inside the king broke. The palace insiders describe it as the moment Charles became fully sovereign. No longer a hesitant son of the queen. No longer the cautious heir trying to appease everyone. But a monarch making a cold, necessary choice for the survival of the institution, even at personal cost. Meanwhile, Meghan had no idea what was brewing. She was in California, attending strategy meetings for upcoming projects, completely unaware that back in London, her name was being erased. When the news reached Montecito, sources say she was shocked into silence. For a woman who built her brand on control, this was the one narrative she couldn't spin. But here's the question that haunted royal watchers. Why now? Why, after years of tension, did Charles finally pull the trigger? Some say it was Anne's insistence. Others point to new internal polling that showed declining public support for the monarchy, especially among younger generations who viewed the firm as outdated and hypocritical. Meghan's ongoing presence as a royal outsider was reportedly damaging that reputation. In short, the monarchy needed a reset, and Charles and Anne were ready to deliver it. But even then, there was one final factor, the Queen's shadow. Before her death, Elizabeth II reportedly left behind private notes to her children about the protection of the crown's dignity. Charles took that seriously and saw it as sacred duty. So when the time came, they acted not just as rulers, but as guardians of their mother's legacy. And that's where it all came together: tradition, resentment, fear, and loyalty. A perfect storm that ended with one signature. Imagine the scene. Charles sits at his mahogany desk, a stack of official papers before him. His reading glasses slide slightly down his nose as he studies the decree one final time. The room is silent except for the faint crackle of a fireplace. Across from him, Princess Anne stands, composed, resolute, her expression unreadable. Without a word, he lifts the pen. And as the ink flows, the modern fairy tale of Meghan Markle, the American actress who became a duchess, comes to its final chapter. But here's where the story takes an unexpected turn. Because while the world thought this was a clean ending, a single decision neatly wrapped up in royal protocol, it wasn't. There was more to this decree than anyone realized. A hidden clause, a personal message buried within the formal language, a message not meant for Meghan, but for someone else entirely. Someone much closer to the crown. And when that secret was discovered, it would ignite a whole new wave of chaos that even the king himself couldn't contain. The moment of silence after the signature was deceptive, because what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. It began behind the closed doors of Balmoral Castle, a place that has witnessed more royal secrets than any other estate in Britain. The soft Scottish wind carried whispers across the heathered hills, but inside those stone walls, the atmosphere was thick with tension. Only a handful of people were present, But what was decided that day would ripple through royal history forever. King Charles sat at the long wooden table, fingers clasped, gaze distant. The table was covered with neatly arranged folders, embossed with the royal crest. Next to him sat Princess Anne, her jaw set, eyes cold, posture perfectly straight. She wasn't just there as his sister. She was there as the enforcer of royal integrity. The no-nonsense royal. The one who never bowed to public opinion or personal sympathy. The topic, Meghan Markle. The tone, final. The decision, imminent. The meeting began quietly. Advisors shuffled papers, lawyers reviewed drafts, and aides exchanged uneasy glances. But it wasn't until Anne spoke that the room fell completely still. She had waited for this conversation, not out of spite, but out of conviction. The monarchy had tolerated too much for too long. And Anne, ever the soldier of royal duty, was about to draw the line. Enough, she said flatly. Her voice cut through the murmurs like glass through silk. She's humiliated this family long enough. Every head turned toward her. Charles didn't respond immediately. He looked tired, older than his years. And he began slowly. You know what this means. Once we do this, there's no going back. Anne's reply was swift. That's the point. It wasn't anger that drove her. It was exhaustion. For years, she had watched the monarchy bend, retreat, and absorb blow after blow from the Sussex drama, the interviews, the tell-alls, the Hollywood ventures. Each one chipped away at the institution she'd dedicated her life to protecting. The monarchy wasn't just her family. It was her purpose. She leaned forward, her voice calm but cutting. Mother always said the crown must come first. Always. Meghan never understood that. She thought this was fame. But this isn't fame. This is duty. And she spat on it. Charles rubbed his temple, a quiet sigh escaping his lips. The words stung because they were true. The monarchy had been dragged through mud, questioned, mocked, and polarized. Every time they tried to move forward, Meghan found a way to drag them back into the headlines. And slid a folder across the table. This is the press timeline from the last 2 years. Look at it. Every article, every clip, every appearance. It's all about her. Not service, not charity, not the family. Just her. She's made a brand out of being royal, and a victim out of the institution that made her. Charles flipped through the pages. Headlines screamed from the sheets. Royal family racism scandal, Meghan's pain, palace neglect, Netflix expose. Every one of them had chipped away at the fragile trust between monarchy and public. This isn't just image, and continued. This is erosion. You think the institution can survive another 5 years of this? The king's silence said everything. For all his diplomacy, Charles had reached a breaking point too. Since ascending the throne, he'd tried to project unity, calm, and modernization. But Meghan's actions constantly reopened wounds that should have healed long ago. Every attempt to reconcile turned into another media storm. Every effort at silence became ammunition for another exclusive. And wasn't done. Do you know what people are saying in Parliament? She asked. They're calling us weak. They're saying we've lost control of our own house. That's not just embarrassing, it's dangerous. We can't have the monarchy mocked by its own deserters. The room stayed silent. The ticking of the grandfather clock filled the space between words. Then, Anne delivered the line that changed everything. You can't protect Harry by protecting her. He made his choice. She made hers. And if we don't act now, they'll destroy everything Mother built. Charles looked up slowly. His eyes, weary but resolute, met his sister's. For the first time in a long time, she saw the king, not the brother. He nodded. Draft it. Those 2 words set history in motion. The advisors exchanged uneasy looks, but Anne's expression remained steady. She knew this was the only path forward. To preserve the crown, someone had to take responsibility. Meghan had crossed too many lines, commercially, politically, personally. The monarchy had given her its name, its trust, its legacy, and she had turned it into a weapon. As the lawyers gathered documents, and stood and walked to the window. Outside, the Scottish landscape stretched endlessly, peaceful, ancient, unbothered. It was a reminder of what the monarchy was meant to represent: endurance, stability, continuity. She won't go quietly, said one aide from across the table, and didn't turn. She never does. But it didn't matter anymore. This wasn't about negotiation. It was about restoration. And as the official wording was read aloud, The gravity of what was happening began to sink in. By the authority vested in His Majesty the King, and in accordance with the Royal Titles Act, the styles and privileges of the Duchess of Sussex are hereby rescinded. Charles took a slow breath. The paper was placed before him, a golden pen beside it. His hand hovered above the line for a moment, not in hesitation, but in contemplation. He thought of Harry, of Diana, of the family that once stood united beneath the same roof. But those days were gone. The pen touched paper, and watched silently, her hands clasped behind her back. There was no triumph in her expression, only grim necessity. To her, this was a wound that had to be cauterized, painful, but essential. As the king signed, a sudden gust of wind rattled the window panes. A storm was brewing outside. The metaphor wasn't lost on anyone. When the final signature was placed, Charles leaned back, exhaling as though he'd released a burden he'd carried for years. The deed was done. But then, and spoke again, softer this time, but with an edge that drew every eye in the room. This isn't the end. You know that, don't you? Charles looked up, puzzled. What do you mean? And turned away from the window and met his gaze. You've taken her titles, yes. But she'll fight back. And when she does, she won't come for you directly. She'll come for your legacy, through Harry. The king's face tightened. Deep down, he knew she was right. Meghan would never take this quietly. She would frame it as cruelty, as punishment, as proof of the monarchy's coldness. And the media would devour it. Then we prepare, Charles said quietly, and nodded once. We already are. Her words hung in the air, heavy with meaning. Outside, rain began to fall against the castle windows, each drop echoing like the ticking of fate. Inside, the advisors finalized the decree, the royal seal was prepared, and an aide was dispatched to Buckingham with explicit instructions. The statement would be released within 72 hours. But before the meeting adjourned, and did something unexpected, she placed a hand on Charles's shoulder, a rare display of affection from the most stoic royal. Mother would have done the same, she said softly. Charles didn't answer, but his eyes glistened with a mix of sorrow and conviction. That night, as the royal convoy departed Balmoral under heavy rain, the mood was somber but resolute. The monarchy had made its decision. The balance between mercy and survival had tipped, and once the sun rose over Buckingham Palace, the world would see the fallout. But even as the ink dried and the statement was prepared for release, something else was happening. Something no one inside that room could have predicted. A late-night communication from California, intercepted by palace security, contained words that would ignite a new wave of royal chaos. Meghan wasn't retreating. She was mobilizing. And while the king and his sister believed they had ended the story, it was only beginning. Because what and said in that meeting, what she told Charles when the cameras were gone, would soon leak. And those 6 words would change the monarchy's image forever. It wasn't rage that made Princess Anne's voice echo through the marble corridors of Buckingham Palace that morning. It was something far more cutting. Disappointment. Years of restraint. Years of silence. Years of watching the monarchy become a global spectacle had finally worn her patience down to a thread. The king's advisors had gathered again, their expressions wary. The room was the same one used for private audiences and state briefings. Heavy drapes drawn, portraits of past monarchs gazing down from the walls, as if judging every word that was spoken beneath them, and didn't wait for introductions or formalities. She walked straight to the head of the table, dropped a thick folder of tabloid clippings onto the polished wood, and said, "You've humiliated us long enough." The room froze. Her tone wasn't angry. It was controlled, calculated, the kind of tone that carried far more weight than shouting ever could. King Charles glanced at her from across the table. He had expected resistance, perhaps a heated debate, but not this. Not, and breaking royal protocol to address the issue with such raw bluntness. She tapped the folder once. "Every single one of these," she said, "is about her. Not the family, not her work, not even her husband. Just her fashion, her interviews, her grievances. Meghan Markle has turned our name into her personal brand." Charles leaned back in his chair, eyes weary. "And I understand how you feel." "No, you don't," she interrupted. "You've been trying to manage this situation like it's a public relations problem. It isn't. It's a credibility crisis." Those words cut through the air like a knife. The advisors exchanged uneasy looks. unsure whether to intervene or stay silent. But no one dared interrupt, and when she was in full command, even the king didn't. "Do you know what people are saying now?" she continued, voice growing sharper. "They think we're scared of her. Scared to act. Scared to draw a line. Every time she gives another interview or leaks another story, we just sit here and hope it fades. It never does, Charles. It festers." The king closed his eyes briefly. "And what would you have me do? Strip her of everything? Publicly exile her? The optics. The optics." And scoffed. "Do you think the public respects weakness? They respect strength. They respected Mother because she never flinched. She made decisions that were painful, but necessary. That's what leadership looks like." Her words struck deep. The memory of Queen Elizabeth, her unwavering composure, her silent strength, filled the room like a ghost. Anne's comparison wasn't meant to wound, but it did. Charles straightened slightly. "You forget. And she was the queen for 70 years. Her authority was unshakable. Mine is newer. I have to tread carefully." Anne's eyes softened for a moment, but only for a moment. "You're the king now? There's no careful. There's only right and wrong. She's using your crown as a platform for her own fame. And if you don't act, she'll dismantle everything you've built." Then she leaned closer, lowering her voice. "This isn't about Meghan anymore. It's about Harry." Charles looked up sharply. "Harry," and nodded. "You've been protecting him through her. Every decision, every delay, every compromise, you think you're shielding your son. You're not. You're enabling her. And he's too blinded by loyalty to see it." The king's face hardened. He didn't respond, but his silence was telling, and pressed on. "Do you remember what Mother said the last time we all sat together at Balmoral? She told you that your greatest test as king wouldn't come from politics or parliament. It would come from family. She was right. And this is it." Charles's gaze drifted to the window. Outside, the London sky was gray and restless, rain streaking down the glass like tears. "She would have wanted peace," he murmured. Anne's reply was swift. "Peace without principle is surrender." That was the moment the mood in the room shifted. You could feel it, like a cold wind passing through, and wasn't appealing to emotion anymore. She was appealing to the monarchy's survival instinct. She stepped closer, her presence commanding. "She's mocked the institution. She's made us look like villains to the world. She's exploited the Queen's death for sympathy. She's sold private conversations for profit. And now she's parading through fashion shows while calling herself a Duchess of Sussex, a title that represents this family. Your family. Enough, Charles. Enough." The king's knuckles whitened as he gripped the edge of the table, and continued, her tone steady but unrelenting. "This isn't vengeance. It's responsibility. You don't let someone burn down your house just because you love who they used to be." Silence again. Heavy, suffocating silence. Then, finally, Charles spoke, his voice low, controlled, but carrying the weight of finality. "If we do this, there's no turning back." And nodded once. "Exactly." A faint rumble of thunder rolled outside, as if the heavens themselves had taken sides. Charles exhaled slowly. "And what do you expect the public to think? That we're vindictive? That I've turned against my own son's wife? They'll think," and said firmly, "that the monarchy still has standards, that the crown still means something, that we're not afraid to defend our name." For a moment, the two royals stared at each other, brother and sister, monarch and defender. The air between them was charged, but beneath it all was a shared understanding. They weren't enemies. They were two people who loved the same thing, the crown. They just loved it in different ways. Then, softly, and added something that no one expected. "I don't hate her, you know." Charles looked at her, surprised. "I don't," she said again, eyes distant. "But I can't let her rewrite who we are. The monarchy isn't a story she gets to tell. It's one she chose to leave." The king said nothing, but the emotion behind his eyes betrayed him. Finally, and pushed the folder closer to him. "You can't let her keep this power, Charles. Not over you. Not over Harry. Not over the crown." The sound of the folder sliding across the table echoed through the room. And that was when Charles made his choice. He stood, slowly but decisively, and looked at the papers spread before him. The legal drafts. The formal declarations. The document that, once signed, would strip Meghan Markle of her royal title. For a long moment, he just stared. His fingers hovered over the pen, his mind flooded with memories. The wedding day, the crowds cheering, the hopes of unity. the promises that had turned into chaos, and stood quietly behind him. She didn't speak, didn't pressure him. She simply waited, because she knew her brother well enough to know that once he decided, he would never look back. Finally, Charles spoke. "Prepare the final draft." Those 4 words sealed Meghan's fate. As the room began to move again, aides gathering documents, advisors making notes, legal staff rushing to finalize the decree, and stepped away. She didn't need to see the rest. She knew how this would end. But before leaving the room, she turned back to her brother and said, "You're doing the right thing, Charles. For the crown, for the country, and for yourself." Charles nodded slowly, his eyes fixed on the paper in front of him. "Perhaps," he whispered, "but not for my son," and paused in the doorway. Her expression softened, and for the first time that day, there was a flicker of sadness in her voice. Sometimes doing the right thing means breaking your own heart. And with that, she walked out, leaving the king alone with his thoughts. The room seemed to shrink around him. Every sound was amplified, the ticking clock, the scratching of pens, the rain outside. He sat there, motionless, staring at the draft of the decree that would change the monarchy's course forever. By the end of that night, word of the meeting had leaked. A whisper turned into a rumor. A rumor turned into a headline. And soon, Buckingham Palace was under siege by speculation. But none of them knew what Anne had really said behind those doors. Her words weren't meant for the cameras or the newspapers. They were meant for the king, a private warning, a final plea disguised as an accusation. "You've humiliated us long enough," she had said. But beneath that anger, there was something else, something she hadn't admitted to anyone. She wasn't just talking about Meghan. She was talking about the cost of inaction, the erosion of dignity, the quiet fear that the monarchy she'd devoted her life to might not survive another generation if this continued. And when she left that room, she knew one truth. The fight had only just begun. Because Meghan wouldn't take this quietly. Anne knew it. But what she didn't know, not yet, was that the next move Meghan made would hit closer to home than anyone expected. Closer to the heart of the crown itself. It looked like an ordinary document. A crisp parchment embossed with the royal crest, bound in leather, sealed in wax. But for Meghan Markle, it was a death sentence, not of the body, but of identity. The royal decree lay on King Charles's desk, illuminated by the faint golden glow of a desk lamp. The words on the page were simple, elegant, and devastating. They were written in the language of tradition, measured, regal, and utterly final. The titles and privileges associated with the Duchess of Sussex are hereby revoked, by the order of His Majesty the King, with the counsel and consent of Her Royal Highness, the Princess Royal. No emotion, no apology, just precision, the monarchy's handwriting of punishment. The day the decree was signed, palace staff moved with the quiet dread of people who knew they were witnessing history. No one smiled. No one whispered. Even the ticking of the ornate clock in the king's study seemed hesitant, as if the walls themselves understood the magnitude of what was happening. Charles sat in silence, the document before him, the pen in his hand. The air was thick. The kind of stillness that carries a weight of consequence. Every decision in this family came with echoes, but this one was different. This one would ring for generations. Across from him, Princess Anne stood, arms crossed, face expressionless. Her role in this moment wasn't emotional. It was procedural, inevitable. The monarchy needed order. Meghan had brought chaos. And now, order was being restored. The king hesitated only once, his eyes flickering briefly to a photograph on his desk. It was old, framed in silver. A picture of Harry and William as children, standing in the gardens of Highgrove, both laughing at something out of frame. Their faces, innocent and unburdened, captured a time before duty had divided them, before titles had become weapons. He looked at Harry's smile, the same smile that had once lit up every room. And then, slowly, he set the frame down face first. The pen met paper. The ink bled into the page, black and unrelenting. With one stroke, the woman once celebrated as the Duchess of Sussex was gone from the royal ledger. Her name, Meghan, Duchess of Sussex, erased from every ceremonial record, every royal register, every order of precedence. The archives would be corrected, the websites updated, the official documents amended. In the eyes of the monarchy, she was no longer one of them. And yet, even as the signature dried, there was something almost haunting about the moment. Because it wasn't triumphant, it was somber. The sound of a door closing forever. Do you think she'll understand why? Charles asked quietly, not looking up. Anne's reply was sharp. It doesn't matter if she understands. It matters that the country does. That was the difference between them. Charles still searched for humanity in every act and sought order. Where he saw people, she saw precedent. Where he saw heartbreak, she saw responsibility. The king pressed the seal into the warm wax at the bottom of the page. The crest of the crown stamped firmly into the red, permanent, symbolic, and cold. There it was. Final. The document was then handed to the royal secretary, who treated it as if it were made of glass. It will be entered into the registry within the hour, Your Majesty, the man said, voice trembling slightly. See that it is, Charles replied softly, and nodded approvingly. This will protect the institution, Charles. It was overdue. But Charles didn't answer her. His gaze was still fixed on the parchment, his fingers tracing the embossed seal. For all the firmness of the decision, for all the authority behind it, something inside him felt hollow. In another life, perhaps, things could have been different. If Meghan had stayed, if Harry had balanced love with duty, if the family had found a way to bridge the gap before it became a chasm. But that chance had evaporated years ago, lost to bitterness, mistrust, and the endless noise of publicity. The monarchy could survive many things, scandal, criticism, even tragedy. But it could not survive ridicule. And in the eyes of the public, Meghan had turned the firm into a spectacle. The next stage was purely formal, but its impact would shake the monarchy's foundations. At exactly 3 p.m., the Lord Chamberlain received the official copy of the decree for public archiving. A second sealed version was sent to the College of Arms, where heraldic officials prepared to amend all royal insignia and documents bearing the Duchess's name. The crest associated with the Sussex title was quietly pulled from public display. No press conference, no speeches, just an internal memo to British media outlets. A formal adjustment in royal titles will be reflected in forthcoming communications. But within hours, it was everywhere. Breaking news: King Charles officially revokes Meghan Markle's royal titles. The internet erupted. Some celebrated it as justice long overdue. Others called it cruel and vindictive. News anchors filled entire hours with speculation. Was this Anne's doing? Was it a final act of royal discipline? Or was it Charles's quiet revenge for years of humiliation? Twitter burned with takes. TikTok flooded with emotional edits of Meghan's journey, from wedding to exile, from glamour to downfall. Even American networks joined in, framing it as a royal reckoning. But the real storm wasn't outside the palace. It was inside it. Because as the decree circulated through official channels, a palace aide noticed something strange. A line buried deep within the legal phrasing, something that hadn't been in earlier drafts. It was subtle, almost poetic, but unmistakably deliberate. It read, "In recognition of duties forsaken and obligations unmet, the Crown acknowledges the closure of this chapter with finality." The words seemed ordinary, but to those who understood royal language, it was more than symbolic. It was personal. Duties forsaken and obligations unmet. That wasn't directed at Meghan. It was aimed at Harry. It was a warning, and noticed it first. She glanced over the line and frowned. "Charles," she said, tapping the page, "this wasn't in the last version." The king didn't look up. "I added it." Anne's brow tightened. "That's not protocol." "No," he replied. "It's family." There was a pause, long, heavy, and full of unspoken things. Anne stared at him for a moment, then slowly sat down. "You're sending him a message." Charles exhaled, eyes still on the parchment. "I'm reminding him of his oath. He may have left, but he's still my son. And a prince. That carries duty, whether he likes it or not." And leaned back, crossing her arms. "And if he reads it as punishment instead of warning? Then he'll know what happens when you forget where you came from." It wasn't cruelty. It was sorrow disguised as authority. The kind of pain only a father and a king could feel at once. But what neither of them knew was that by adding that one line, Charles had set off a chain reaction that would turn the family's quiet decision into a global spectacle. Because when the document was processed by the heraldic office, a junior clerk, unaware of the sensitivity, leaked a photo of the decree to a journalist at the Times. The story exploded. Not only had Meghan lost her titles, but the document contained what tabloids now called the king's coded message to his son. It was no longer a simple royal action. It was a declaration of war. In California, Meghan's team scrambled. The headlines hit her phone before she even finished her morning coffee. According to insiders, she was stunned, then furious. She reportedly told one assistant, "They've humiliated me, and they think I'll stay quiet?" But this time, she wasn't the only one enraged. Harry, silent for weeks, read the decree himself, saw that single phrase, and went pale. Duties forsaken and obligations unmet. He knew exactly what it meant. His father wasn't just cutting off his wife. He was cutting him out of royal redemption. The tension between duty and defiance, love and loyalty, had reached its peak. Back in London, Charles sat alone that night, staring out at the palace courtyard. The lamps glowed faintly against the rain-slicked cobblestones. The crown, in its velvet case, rested quietly on the desk beside the decree. He whispered something softly, almost to himself. "I had to, Harry. I had to." But across the ocean, another storm was forming, one that no decree could contain. Because Meghan Markle wasn't done yet, and her next move would make even the palace tremble. It wasn't supposed to be there. A single line, hidden, almost poetic, buried deep in royal phrasing, had turned an administrative act into a global scandal. The hidden clause inside King Charles's decree wasn't meant for the public eye. It wasn't even meant for Meghan. It was for Harry. And the moment that secret was discovered, the entire palace went into panic mode. It started with a quiet murmur from the palace's internal legal office. A senior aide, reviewing copies of the decree for archival submission, noticed something odd about the document's phrasing. Royal decrees were supposed to be written in legal neutrality, detached, objective, and sterile. But this one wasn't. It carried undertones of emotion, almost judgment. Duties forsaken and obligations unmet. It wasn't just a statement. It was an accusation. The aide brought it to his supervisor's attention. Within minutes, word reached the king's private secretary. And within the hour, the news reached Princess Anne. She didn't say much when she read the line, but her eyes narrowed. She recognized her brother's handwriting instantly. When she confronted Charles later that evening, his response was simple but telling. It had to be said. Anne's reply was as cold as the Scottish wind outside Balmoral. "You're not writing a diary entry, Charles. You're writing history." But it was too late. The clause had already made its way to the press. A photo of the decree, leaked by an unknown source inside the royal archives, appeared in the Times under the headline, "King's Secret Message to Harry Hidden in Meghan's Title Revocation Decree." The story spread faster than wildfire. British tabloids ran with it, American talk shows debated it, and online forums erupted with speculation. Was it a personal dig? A veiled warning? Or the king's way of signaling that Harry's own titles might be next? For Meghan, it was humiliation on an entirely new level. Sources close to her claimed she was furious, pacing, shaking, demanding answers from her PR team. She reportedly slammed her phone down after reading the article and said, "He's mocking me, mocking us." But it wasn't the mocking that broke her composure. It was the realization that the monarchy wasn't afraid of her anymore. The very institution she thought she could challenge had just reminded her, in the coldest way possible, who still held the pen. Back in London, and tried to contain the fallout. For her, this wasn't about emotion, it was about control. The leak had transformed a carefully calculated act of discipline into a public family feud. She met with the royal communications team at dawn, her tone clipped and practical. "We'll issue no clarification," she said. "No statements. No corrections. The monarchy doesn't explain itself, ever." "But, ma'am," one aide hesitated, "the public perception," and cut him off. "The public perception is fleeting. The crown is permanent." Meanwhile, Charles faced a storm of his own. Parliamentarians were asking questions. Media outlets were demanding a press briefing. International commentators accused him of weaponizing the monarchy against his own family. And through it all, Charles remained composed, outwardly, at least. But behind closed doors, the toll was visible. The king who had always sought balance now found himself painted as both tyrant and victim. Late one night, in his private study, Charles confided to his longtime advisor Sir Edward, "Perhaps I went too far." Sir Edward didn't look up from the stack of documents he was sorting. "Majesty," There are two ways to rule, by affection or by authority. You tried affection first. Charles gave a weary smile. And affection failed. The next morning, the royal decree was formally entered into the National Archive. And in that moment, quiet, bureaucratic, almost routine, a centuries-old precedent was shattered. For the first time in modern history, a member of the royal family had been stripped of titles not for treason, not for crime, but for bringing dishonor to the institution itself. It was meant to be the end of the story, but inside the palace, whispers grew louder about another layer of the decree. A supposed handwritten annotation that wasn't included in the public version. A royal insider claimed to have seen it. A small, discreet note in Charles's own handwriting beside the final paragraph. It simply read, "Loyalty is not a crown to wear, but a duty to uphold." If true, it wasn't just poetic, it was personal. Meghan's name may have been erased from royal records, but Charles had written something that couldn't be erased, a message that spoke volumes about his state of mind, his loss, and his view of family. Across the ocean, Harry sat in silence when he first saw the full text of the decree. His face hardened, his jaw tight. "He's speaking to me," he said to Meghan quietly. Meghan, still fuming, replied, "He's attacking you." Harry shook his head. "No, he's reminding me." The moment hung heavy between them. Two very different interpretations of the same act. One seeing cruelty, the other a wounded father's warning. But in the media's eyes, it didn't matter. The narrative had already taken hold. The hidden clause became the story. Pundits dissected every word. Commentators debated its subtext. Was the monarchy signaling that Harry himself was next? Was this the beginning of the end for the Sussexes' connection to the crown? In one viral broadcast, a royal historian explained it bluntly. When a monarch embeds coded language in a royal decree, it's never accidental. This is Charles drawing a moral line. He's saying, loyalty is earned, not inherited. The revelation sent shockwaves through royal circles. Some insiders praised the king's courage. Others whispered that it was, and who pushed him too far. But those closest to the process knew the truth. The line was Charles's own addition. And in that small act of defiance, he had changed the tone of the monarchy itself. No longer silent, no longer passive, but sharp, watchful, unforgiving. As palace staff began locking the signed decree into the royal archives, a clerk noticed something else, a faint indentation beneath the wax seal. The king's personal crest. Slightly altered. It wasn't the usual version used on public documents. It was the private one, the same design that had once belonged to his mother, Queen Elizabeth. That subtle choice wasn't just symbolic. It was ancestral. Charles wasn't acting as a man or even as a father. He was acting as the custodian of the crown. And yet, for all its formality, something about that decision felt haunted. Almost as if the late Queen's shadow lingered over every word, watching, approving, warning. By the end of that week, the world had moved from shock to speculation. Would Harry respond publicly? Would Meghan retaliate with another interview? Would and address the rumors about her influence over the decision? The palace, as always, said nothing. But silence doesn't kill speculation, it feeds it. And soon, journalists began digging deeper. That's when someone, no one quite knows who, leaked another document. This one wasn't an official decree. It was a private memorandum, a brief note circulated between the king and his sister before the signing. The note contained a line that sent chills through those who read it. Let this be the final act of mercy before consequence must take its course. The leak was devastating. It painted the royal siblings not as vengeful rulers, but as weary guardians of an institution trying desperately to protect itself from within. And for Meghan, that narrative was intolerable. She called her team together the next morning in Montecito. If they want to talk about duty and mercy, she said, pacing, voice trembling with anger, then let's remind them what cruelty looks like. What she did next would turn the entire monarchy upside down once more. Because Meghan didn't call her lawyer. She didn't call her PR team. She called Netflix. And that phone call, that one impulsive, furious, perfectly timed phone call, would unleash a chain reaction that not even the king or princess could stop. But before the palace learned about it, one more leak was already on its way. A letter, written in Princess Anne's own hand, that would turn the sympathy of the British public against Meghan overnight. It wasn't a text or an email. It was a call, short, sharp, emotional, and unmistakably personal. The kind of call that changes everything. When Meghan Markle picked up her phone that morning in Montecito, she was no longer the picture of royal elegance or calm composure that the world had once seen. Her hair was unkempt, her voice tight, her movements frantic. The moment she saw the headlines flashing across her screen, Meghan stripped of royal titles, King's hidden message to Harry, and's final warning, she exploded. Inside her home office, the blinds were half drawn, the California sun slicing through the room in narrow golden streaks. She was pacing, barefoot, gripping her phone like it was the only thing anchoring her. Her assistant tried to calm her down, suggesting they wait for the PR team's official statement, but Meghan wasn't interested in diplomacy. "No," she said, her tone cold and decisive. "We're not waiting. We're responding." The first number she dialed wasn't her publicist's or even Harry's. It was Netflix. The executive on the other end wasn't surprised. "Meghan," he began carefully, "we've seen the coverage. We were expecting you to." "Don't patronize me," she snapped. "You know what they've done. They've humiliated me publicly, and they've dragged my husband into it." The man hesitated. "We understand your frustration, but—" "No, you don't," Meghan interrupted again, her voice cracking slightly. "They've declared war, and I'm not going to let them win." That was the start of it, the call that would shake both Hollywood and Buckingham Palace. Within hours, her team at Archewell began coordinating an emergency media strategy. Notes were flying back and forth between PR managers, legal advisors, and production contacts. The plan was simple: reclaim the narrative. If the palace wanted to define her as the problem, she would show the world that she was the victim. But Meghan didn't just want to defend herself. She wanted to control the story. And that's when the idea resurfaced, a follow-up documentary. The first series, Harry and Meghan, had broken records and fueled controversy across the globe. But this time, Meghan wanted something different, darker, more personal, more emotional. She told her team, "This won't be about the royal family. This will be about what they did to me." Her eyes burned with determination as she paced the room. "They think they've silenced me. Let's remind them I still have a voice." Meanwhile, across the Atlantic, the palace was in chaos. News of Meghan's call to Netflix had already reached the royal press office through private back channels. The moment Princess Anne was briefed, she closed her eyes and muttered, "Of course she did," and wasn't surprised. She was prepared. She'll try to paint herself as the victim, and said during an emergency meeting with advisors, "We can't stop her from speaking, but we can stop people from believing her." Her solution wasn't PR. It wasn't an interview. It wasn't even an official statement. It was something far more strategic and deeply personal. And went to her private quarters that night and retrieved something few people knew existed, a handwritten letter she had written months earlier, shortly after the Queen's passing. The letter was private, never meant to be seen outside royal walls. It was her reflection on the chaos Meghan had caused and her belief that duty must outweigh vanity. She handed the letter to her trusted assistant, her voice calm but commanding. "If she attacks us again, leak it." The aide looked stunned. "Ma'am, are you sure?" "That would do it," and said firmly, "If she wants a story, let's give her the truth." Back in California, Meghan's fury was evolving into something more focused. Her PR head, a sharp-tongued strategist named Carla, arrived at the house to draft the official response. "Here's the line," Carla said, sliding a notepad across the table. "The Duchess has long moved beyond royal labels and continues to live a life of service, compassion, and integrity, regardless of titles." Meghan frowned. "It's too polite." Carla hesitated. "That's intentional. You don't want to look angry. You want to look wronged." Meghan pushed the paper away. "No, I want to look powerful." She grabbed a pen and began scribbling her own version. When she was done, the message was shorter, sharper, and dripping with venom disguised as grace. "Titles don't define leadership, character does. I wish those clinging to outdated institutions the peace they clearly need." It was a thinly veiled jab at Charles and Anne, and Meghan knew it. When the post went live on her official account, it went viral instantly. Fans flooded her comments with support, but critics, especially in the UK, were ruthless. Disrespectful, hypocritical, arrogant. Every insult found its echo. But then came the headline that no one, not even Meghan, expected. An early morning leak from the Telegraph hit the wires. Princess Anne's private letter reveals her true feelings on Meghan Markle. The internet erupted again. The letter wasn't vicious. It was devastating precisely because it wasn't. It was dignified, measured, heartbreakingly human. In it, Anne had written, "There are moments when one must choose between image and integrity. I will always choose the latter. A crown is not an accessory. It is a responsibility." The public read that and drew their own conclusions. For years, Meghan had painted herself as the modern, misunderstood woman, the progressive who dared to challenge the system. But here was Princess Anne, the very embodiment of service, humility, and old-world discipline, writing with quiet authority about duty and sacrifice. The contrast was brutal. Online sentiment shifted almost overnight. Hashtags that had once defended Meghan began to turn. Hashtag stand with the crown. Hashtag Princess Anne speaks. Hashtag integrity over image. Meghan's team scrambled to control the narrative. But the damage was done. For the first time since she left the UK, the public tide was turning, not just against her, but in favor of the monarchy. Even in the US, opinion was divided. Pundits who had once praised Meghan began questioning her motives. Is she fighting for justice? One talk show host asked, or just fighting to stay relevant? Meanwhile, in London, Anne's office maintained complete silence. No confirmation, no denial, just the quiet power of non-response. When a reporter shouted, "Princess Anne, did you leak that letter?" as she left an engagement, she turned her head slightly and said, "I don't comment on family matters." That was all. 5 words. And yet it said everything. Back in Montecito, Meghan felt cornered. The letter had done more damage than any interview or statement could have. For the first time, she realized she wasn't just up against palace protocol. She was up against Anne's reputation, the woman the British public trusted most. That night, she called Harry into her office. Her voice was quieter now, trembling not from rage, but from something else, fear. "They're winning," she said. "They're turning everyone against us." Harry didn't respond. He'd been silent for most of the day, brooding, scrolling through the headlines, watching the tide shift. Finally, he said softly, "Maybe this is the price we pay." Meghan looked up sharply. "For what?" "For leaving." The room fell silent. Outside, the California sun was setting, casting long golden streaks across the room. But for the first time, it didn't feel like warmth. It felt like a warning. Because this wasn't the end. Not even close. Anne's letter had silenced Meghan publicly, but behind the scenes, she was already planning her next move. One that would be far more explosive than any interview or social media post. It wouldn't be a statement. It wouldn't be an apology. It would be an exposure. Because deep within Kensington's archives, buried beneath years of locked records, there existed a document. One Meghan had once signed without reading every clause. A document that now threatened to destroy her entire defense. And when that document resurfaced, it would make everything she'd ever claimed, every word, every grievance, every accusation, crumble in front of the world. The clock was ticking, and Meghan had no idea what was coming next. It began with a single key turning in a lock deep inside Kensington's private archives. The air in the room was dry, heavy, untouched for years. Rows of steel cabinets lined the walls, each one filled with documents, old agreements, royal correspondences, and contracts signed by generations of monarchs and their families. Most had never seen daylight since being sealed. But on that quiet afternoon, one particular drawer, labeled Sussex, Entry Documents, 2018, was opened for the first time in half a decade. Inside was a file stamped with a crimson seal and the Queen's insignia. The document that would soon shake the entire royal narrative to its core. It was Meghan Markle's original royal agreement, a binding contract signed shortly before her wedding to Prince Harry. For years, rumors had swirled about its existence. Royal watchers speculated about what Meghan had agreed to, what she had refused, and whether she had secretly negotiated special terms for her role. But until that day, no one outside the palace had ever seen it. The document was supposed to stay sealed indefinitely. It was part of the royal family's internal process for integrating spouses into the firm. An old, somewhat archaic system rooted in tradition and legal protection. But now, with the public pressure mounting and the monarchy's image under siege once again, someone decided it was time to bring it to light. According to palace insiders, Princess Anne personally authorized the review. "Bring me the file," she said curtly during a briefing with senior aides. "If she's going to rewrite our story, let's remind her of the one she actually signed." The aides hesitated. "Ma'am, the document was sealed under the late Queen's personal order. It's meant to remain confidential." Anne's response was cutting. "So was our family life. That didn't stop her from selling it. That was all it took." Within the hour, the file was in her hands. The parchment was thick, cream-colored, the ink slightly faded at the edges. Across the top, in elegant calligraphy, it read, "Agreement of Conduct and Representation, House of Windsor." It was a kind of moral contract, not just a legal one. A set of expectations outlining how Meghan, as an incoming royal, would balance her individuality with the monarchy's traditions. But buried in the middle of the text, among clauses about charity work and media cooperation, was one particular section that now stood out like a dagger. Clause 7b. No personal or commercial endeavor shall bring the royal house into disrepute or conflict with its stated duties of service, loyalty, and discretion. At the time, it had seemed like a formality. Every royal spouse signed something similar. But given everything that had happened, the interviews, the Netflix deal, the memoirs, the public criticism of the institution, this clause now read like an accusation written years in advance. And read the line twice, her expression hardening. "She violated every word of this," she said quietly. The senior legal advisor beside her nodded. "In principle, yes. That clause alone would justify the revocation of her titles." "Then that's exactly what we'll show," Anne replied. "The document wasn't leaked directly. That would have been too obvious. Instead, excerpts began appearing in whispers across the British press. An unnamed royal source provided journalists with select paragraphs. The Telegraph published one under the headline, "Exclusive, Meghan's Forgotten Royal Contract Could Explain Palace's Final Decision." The story spread fast. The article detailed the moral agreement, the duty clauses, the expectations of loyalty, and even snippets of Meghan's own signature beneath the royal crest. It painted a devastating picture, not of a victim, but of a woman who had knowingly signed into the monarchy's rules, only to break them one by one. The internet split once again. Supporters accused the palace of weaponizing paperwork to attack a woman of color. Critics said it was proof she had betrayed the very system that gave her global fame. But the most damaging reaction came not from the public, but from legal analysts. Prominent constitutional experts confirmed that the clause, while symbolic, held real weight in royal governance. In other words, the king's decree wasn't a personal vendetta. It was enforcement. Meanwhile, in California, Meghan watched it unfold in real time. The news alerts came one after another, lighting up her phone like a barrage of missiles. She stormed into Harry's study, holding her tablet out in disbelief. "They're using my own signature against me," she shouted. Harry looked up slowly, his expression torn between shock and weariness. "Is it real?" She glared at him. "Of course it's real. But I didn't think they'd—" She stopped, realizing how weak that sounded. He stared at her quietly. "You didn't think they'd what?" "That they'd weaponize it," she said finally, her voice cracking. "It was supposed to be ceremonial, Harry. Just a formality before the wedding. Everyone signs those things." Harry sighed and leaned back in his chair. "Everyone signs them. But not everyone breaks them." The silence that followed was heavy. Meghan sat down, pressing her palms against her temples. "They've planned this for months. And, Charles, all of them. They waited until the right moment." Harry didn't argue. He knew she was right about that much. The precision of the leaks, the timing, the coordination, it was too deliberate to be coincidence. But even as Meghan spiraled into frustration, Harry's mind was elsewhere. That contract, that signature, that clause, it all confirmed what he'd feared for years. His family had never stopped keeping receipts. For the first time, he began to realize that maybe reconciliation was no longer possible. Across the ocean, the Royal Communications Office maintained silence, as always. But privately, the palace was buzzing. The document had done its job. The public now saw the king's decree not as cruelty, but as consequence. In the weeks that followed, support for the monarchy surged in national polls. For the first time since the Queen's death, public confidence in Charles's leadership climbed above 70%. The tide had turned, and Princess Anne was the architect behind it. "She knew what she was doing," said one senior courtier. That contract wasn't just paperwork, it was ammunition, and she fired it at exactly the right time. Meanwhile, Meghan's Netflix deal, the very project she'd turned to for redemption, was suddenly in jeopardy. Insiders leaked reports that executives were reassessing their relationship with the Sussexes amid fears of public backlash. The calls that had once been returned in seconds were now taking days. Invitations were being postponed. Hollywood, ever sensitive to reputation, had begun to cool. For the first time in years, Meghan was realizing what it meant to lose control of the narrative. And in London, behind the closed doors of Clarence House, Charles received a confidential note from his sister. It contained no greeting, no signature, just one line written in Anne's unmistakable handwriting. Order restored. But peace was a fragile illusion. Because while the monarchy was stabilizing in Britain, something darker was brewing abroad.